Health England is really committed to programme on community-centred approaches and really putting the essence of communities at the heart of health and well-being. And we can't do that unless we're actually engaging properly with community-based organisations. So part of the purpose of today was to show that Public Health England is able to reach out and work with a whole set of local agencies and others. They are the ones that have the expertise. All we can do is crystallise and take some of that expertise in the places that we have to go. So it was absolutely fundamental, and we were asked by our Chief Executive, Duncan Selby, to get a golden thread of community-based approaches and communities running through this conference. So what better way to start than two fantastic examples of real-life community development, activism, social networks, and really building and supporting communities.
Yeah, I think we're here to discuss sort of community-led approaches to health and well-being. I'm really interested in sort of community-led movements and communities creating their own health and well-being. And I think Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network and Kingfisher Treasure Seekers were just great examples of how that happens as an iterative process. So it's developmental and it happens in stages. And Wandsworth Community Empowerment Network, I think, shows really good examples of creating safe spaces so that you can engage with commissioners on an equal footing. And I think that's a huge development for community organisations, basically.
Well, I think there's some issues about health, how we see health being about not just about the thing that we call health, but about all the social relationships, all the having people safe spaces to meet, all the social networks that are in communities, all of those being important resources for people's health. So that one thing I really took from it. And I think as well about the ambition of those two projects to just start from a completely different place in the community and build things up from there.
I think primarily what we wanted to share was a different approach to seeing communities. Quite often voluntary sector or community sector or faith sector are often boxed together as this other thing over there. And what we wanted to share with our colleagues today was that actually when you look at the voluntary sector or the faith sector, the community sector, this is not a homogeneous group. These are networks of networks, and a lot of them are very complex and very dynamic. And that once you see community sector and voluntary sector in that way as complex networks, you're then able to emerge from that a different set of realities, particularly leaders, connectors, people who are active within networks and get things done. That then takes us to a place of network interventions, that once we see community groups as networks and then understand what the leadership structures are within these networks, we're then able to work with these leaders to intervene in these networks in a very different kind of way.
I think the key point is there is great potential and great resources out there in the community, and particularly some of the smaller community groups, that the system at the moment is set up in a way to make it more difficult for these smaller community groups to really have the impact they could have. And with support, certainly we've had Public Health England support and know what that's done for us as an organisation to move forward. So with the right support, the right encouragement, the right help, these groups can flourish and really can be a part of the solution for health for lots of different people.
Both speakers I found really interesting. I think the bit that came across most to me was that sort of a leap of faith, that they start out not kind of knowing what's going to happen in the end and not knowing what the interventions are that are going to sort of arise from the work that they're doing, and sort of that initial process and how might we replicate that elsewhere. So sort of building communities in those networks, and then at the end of it, it was for Malik's organisation, it was about mental health and building those family practitioners.
I was really impressed. They're talking sense. If you don't listen to communities, if you don't work with communities, if you don't respect the experience of communities, we miss out on a very valuable contribution to our attempts to improve health and prevent ill health. The communities provide some of the answers in terms of how they think, how they go about their day-to-day living with their peers. That's where their health beliefs, their health norms are shaped and shared. And if we want to influence their health behaviour, we have to work with them.
With our work, initially at New Testament Assembly, we were focused a lot on just the way that we were working. And so when we met with Malik, he exposed us to the land around us, so to speak, introduced us to the network of other churches and other needs that we could meet. And so when we became part of this whole WCEN family, we've expanded our work. So in terms of the two areas that we were discussing today, the exercise program and the systemic family therapy work, the guys have gone through the program, very difficult study, but we've come out the other side, and now we're still using those skills now to empower our congregations.
I absolutely agreed with the approach that was set out and understood where he was kind of coming from in some of my own policy areas at the moment. I think the strong point is the relationships that you form, the partners that you can work with, because if you can find the areas of mutual kind of interest, you'll deliver and you'll do far more together than we'll ever do alone, or I'll ever do sat behind my PC in my office. So it's working with the communities and the people far closer to the ground.
Yeah, I think it's a great approach, and it's certainly a lot of the things we're focusing on in the North East. We've been looking at different approaches, what people are using to empower communities and engage communities better. So a lot of the work, a lot of the stuff within the presentation kind of focuses and resonates with what we're currently looking at in the North East. There was some great ideas there around connecting with communities and being part of that wider connection in order to kind of get the vulnerable groups and be able to connect people together. So it was some really, really interesting stuff.
So from my point of view, I think we moved from the idea that there's a transactional relationship with communities to sort of transformative, and that will only happen when communities sort of start delivering and developing their own sort of health initiatives. So I think people came away and thought about how there's the middle ground in terms of sort of transition and how that might work and how they can listen to communities more. I thought that was great. People talked about, not just project-based work, but listening long-term, embedding it in the DNA of commissioners and organisations, which was really powerful.
And there's a lot of stuff which you can't actually commission because you're essentially attempting to commission relationships or commission sustainable communities. So we can bring in all sorts of programs, program budgets, and So yes, we can move some commissioning budget to being more early intervention, but I suppose what I've picked up on is you start with not necessarily our health programs, but start with civic society. So what are the kind of things that we can, the conditions in society that enable people to have better relationships with one another? Because I'm more likely to pick up early intervention stuff with my friend than a GP, even if that GP's been funded on some special early intervention program, I suppose.
However, what I thought was interesting was listening to the commissioner point of view and those that receiving the information point of view, and how the challenges of that. And I thought something was interesting about creating a safe environment for commissioners, which is something I can take back to my borough, because I think sometimes as a local authority, it's more like, well, you sort of sit there and listen to what we have to say, and then this is how we're going to do it. So I thought, for me personally, listening to that sort of different approach was really very useful.
Going forward is find how we can marry the existing system requirements with the emergence of community-centred practice. And I think the next few years is for us to start to develop ways that existing system requirements and community-centred practice can come together to deliver change. So I think the next 4 or 5 or 10 years is modelling what these new ways of working look like.
For me, what I loved about Wandsworth was that sense of really knowing some of the system theory and some of the ways, and particularly the social network research that was really inspirational. But then taking that research and actually acting on it, building not just networks, using the networks of influence and connectivity to make a difference in communities, and that process of task shifting, where people can get very good skills very quickly and use those skills immediately to help impact on communities, families and individuals. That was just fantastic.